The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, at the 420 studio, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and I am blessed. I'm keeping the streak alive of about 380,000 in a row shows where I get to talk to the most interesting folks on the planet. Pure and simple. Again, today's no exception. My guest is a regular on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. He was here at the inception. He is my godfather, Tony D'Angelo. How are you, sir?
I am fine, Zig, and as Vince Scully would say, a good day to you, dear folks, wherever you may be.
Wherever you may be, and that's how Claire, our mutual friend Claire Hall, opens her podcast in honor of the late, great Vince Scully.
Well, he's still with us, at least. I pray he is.
I'm sorry. Yes, he is still with us. My brain has passed away. That's he needs to rest in peace. It's early in the morning here on what is it? Friday the 28th or Saturday now?
Saturday,
God.
yeah.
When every day is a holiday and you don't really, it doesn't change much for me day to day. I never consider this work. I consider it play. When I was a kid, I suffered from Maynard G. Krebs-itis, where I was literally allergic to work. It was just... So what I did is I made my passion and my play my work, and I kind of fool myself into thinking that I'm not working sometimes, because I'm not. I'm playing, and that's the name of the game. Is if it's work, it's going to be distasteful if you'd rather be doing something else. And if you're working at your passion, it's not really work. So it's confusing, but maybe I'm
it makes perfect sense to me.
Well, if it does, you can explain it to me sometime. when we have about a half an hour, because I'm a slow learner. But I do love what I do, and part of what I do is I get to talk to old friends, and I get to see their reaction to current events and what their memories are of the people that are involved. In this case, what made me think of you as a guest this morning was the recent passing of who just died, the radio.
Don Imus.
Don Imus. Imus in the morning, and I was shocked at that, only because I looked up and his age was 79 years old. Time really goes by. Imus hit the scene, as it were, like 40 years ago.
Oh, maybe more, Zig. I mean, I remember him, and he was actually working in radio, I think, before that, but I remember him as a 1971 with the old WNBC in New York, and that was sort of, WNBC was kind of a mixed, it was music and news during the day, and at night was kind of a talk show format. Very late at night was your hero, Long John Nebel.
Right.
I listened to him many nights as I was trying to get some knowledge into my pea brain, and also later on came Arthur George Russ Jr., the sportscaster with the four names. So Imus was actually sort of a new wave of morning DJ going back, close to 50 years ago in New York.
And Gene Shepard was gracing those airwaves as well.
Yeah.
In those days. So New York radio, Barry Gray, Barry Farmer, not Barry Farmer, there was
Farber.
Farber, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. These were people who could communicate in a way that drew one in, drew you to love radio because you were being entertained and educated at the same time.
And there was something for everybody, or even something depending on your mood. Like if you wanted a straight top 40, it was Music Radio 77 WABC. If you wanted something a little bit more...
With your hero, Murray the K.
Yeah, well, actually, Murray, I caught on to Murray later on. Murray was actually working as a disc jockey with Imus in the early 70s at WNBC. And it was sort of like, I don't know, fits and starts. They had kind of a, which was pretty funny, kind of a mutual insult session going back and forth. And Murray would call Imus a dumb Pollock and things like that. And, of course, back then, it wasn't like you sent the PC police out. It was funny. But the Murray...
And you know what? It still is funny. And the PC police have overreacted.
Oh, for sure.
In the time span that we're talking about, it's become so sterile that people can't see the humor in things that, even though they're stereotypical and this, that, and the other thing, still flat-ass funny.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it wasn't like, if there were many things that you were doing back then that if you didn't like them, you didn't listen to them. You didn't dwell on them. If you thought they were funny, you laughed.
Right. Well, when I'm a few years older than you, not many, but a few, enough to have seen a change in radio before your time. Funny to the radio audience when I grew up in the 50s, mid-50s and whatever, was Arthur Godfrey, Sam Levinson. These people were never politically incorrect. There was no such thing. There was as that. And consequently, they weren't all that funny. Let's face it. A lot of the stereotypical stuff comes from stereotypical stuff. We're all human. I'm Jewish. There are things to laugh about within my my tribe, but that I'm comfortable with and was comfortable hearing as good-natured jibes years ago. And you don't get to hear that. There's no byplay, like you said, between Italians, the good-natured jibes between those two that you talked about, Murray the K and Imus.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore.
No, and it's really a shame because everything we do now, it's I'm wounded, and we need our little safe zones, and we have to keep the world out, and you've wounded me, and all kinds of, and it's like I try very, 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 very hard. I hope to be successful and not offending people and not trying to make them feel uncomfortable, but I'm not perfect, and the thought that, everybody has to walk around on pins and needles, I think is beyond inane, but this is the world we have created. Maybe not you or I.
Yeah, well, I push buttons every now and again, and I figure, like, It said in the play A Thousand Clowns, you got to goose the world every now and again to prove that you're a human being, not just a chair. And I don't mind pushing buttons with the hopes that their comeback can inspire good-natured conversation where we can see each other's differences.
It's something the world needs on so many fronts.
Yes, and if you can combine humor with that, like so few people do, the one who comes to mind is the man who evolved basically from Imus. I think Imus set the tone, and that's Howard Stern, an incredibly apt interviewer, excellent interviewer. He is. I saw a recent interview with Hillary Clinton and Howard Stern, and it was 90 minutes, and he got her to open up in a manner that I had never seen. I had been a Hillary Clinton supporter for a lot of years before the Democrats screwed Bernie out of the nomination, and that kind of angered me a little bit. But she was just a human being, and he got her to be that way. So I will always respect Howard Stern for his abilities along those lines. His shock stuff, frankly, doesn't impress me that much.
No, and that's really, I think, if you look at Imus and if you look at Howard Stern, I mean, coming down into the early 80s and I guess it was still WNBC, Imus was doing the morning show, and it was kind of like, and I think it was a demographic thing, as people started to migrate from AM radio. AM radio seemed to think it had to do more, shall we say, off-color stuff. I just can't think of a better term right now, to keep the listeners. So it was, we'll get them in the morning with Imus, and we'll get them in the evening with Howard Stern. And it was like, after a while, you just kind of said, look, can you give me, the kind of stuff that will make me feel better, as opposed to just this I'm going to call it a race to the gutter, which is really what it was. But I think that was the pressure put on these stations just to, keep listeners and keep advertisers. And then after a while, a couple of years later, WNBC turned to all sports radio, because Art Rust was doing the nightly sports show, I think probably going back to the late 70s, and boy, I miss him. But, I never hung around him long enough for him to ask me for $20. I know people that did. But, after that, it just became...
He's just a poor money manager like my dear old self. That's all.
But, it was just, trying to keep up with a shrinking demographic as to people that were actually listening to AM radio for music and entertainment, and that was kind of, at least that time, going over to FM. Now, turn on, AM or FM, and you don't know what you're going to get where. In some places, I don't even want to think about it.
Well, we're also in an age where we have the ability to entertain ourselves. Either we can make playlists on our own music and pump it into our heads and play anything we want at any time of day and night. We didn't have that. We had the expression, when you were going around the dial, push button song. That's a song that would come on, you'd push the button to go to another station to see what they were playing. Now,
yes.
What with technology and what have you, we can design our own entertainment to meet our moment-to-moment desires.
But we'll never hit that quality that was hit back, way back when. I mean, the stations that were doing the product, WABC is one, CKLW out of Detroit, the Big 8, the Motown sound, the Drake format, with the really neat jingles and things. There is not that much, not anywhere near that much creativity and spontaneity and discipline these days to do that on radio. The skills just simply aren't there.
Right. Now, where, for instance, I'll ask you, you probably know more about that. Where did Murray the K, for instance, get his training?
Again, I became familiar with Murray when he came to WNBC in the early 70s, and he kind of by that time sort of lost his fastball. He tried to do the nostalgia thing. It was a little bit fakey. I don't think he lasted very long. My belief with Murray the K, from what I understood, was the old WINS in New York, which really was one of the first stations to go from all music to all news, probably in the mid-1960s, I believe. Then WCBS 880 followed. From what old-timers tell me, WCBS 880 used to broadcast the Yankee games, back in the Mantle and Maris days.
Right. I want to pay homage. We're talking about early mornings and shock jocks and going from the days of Arthur Godfrey to the days of Howard Stern. I want to pay homage to two people I grew up listening to, Frank and Mike in the morning on KFRC or KNBR rather in Northern California. They were on for like 20, 30 years, and they combined a morning show of lighthearted humor, news, local news that was interesting, played a little music, and did some sports, along with giving you the weather, which was a way to get into the day. And they made you comfortable, made one comfortable about living in the Bay Area, and they did it for like 30 years.
Wow.
So I just wanted to tell you how blessed I was to live in an area that wasn't New York radio, what I grew up with, but when I came out here in the mid-'60s through the Air Force and then decided to stay, I was pleasantly surprised that there was excellent radio out here as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, without a doubt.
These are the days before syndication, so that whatever was broadcast in New York stayed in New York, and the same thing out here. There was a nighttime guy out here. His name was Ira Blue, and Ira Blue just did much the same thing that Long John Nebel did, kind of a combination of Shep and Long John Nebel in a lot of ways. But his lead-in song was the beautiful Rhapsody in Blue. So what a way to lead into his show.
Well, and
he wasn't cheap enough that he wasn't cheap like me, that he wasn't going to pay the royalties on something like that. I'm sure that was no problem. And we've talked about that. We've talked about that ad infinitum.
For sure.
What can I say? I just wanted to give my listening audience and you a little bit of what I experienced and how my love affair with radio, with New York radio, transcended to living in California. as I so much enjoyed the Giants when they moved, when I was a Giant fan in New York. When they moved, I so desperately missed them, and then I got to spend my life out here in California
watching them.
I was a Met fan because once the Mets came to replace the Giants and Dodgers in New York, I was going to remain loyal to them for life, and I was, but it had been a struggle to follow them, living out here and they being back east. But the Giants, they were my second love in those years, and I got to see Willie and the great Jack Sanford, whose jacket passed through your brother, you, and now hangs on the wall of the 420 studio.
That jacket was at the 1962 World Series.
Yes, it was. And it was originally that jacket, God knows how far back that jacket goes, because it has the arm patch of the Giants when they were in New York, and there's no frontal patch on it, as
the later Giants jackets had. Yes.
Yes, in New York there was no frontal patch, so I'm sure that jacket came with them in the locker that they shipped when they moved out to New York, and it was worn in San Francisco.
I mean, if something was good, they kept it.
Oh yeah, they didn't change They passed down uniforms. Players will have one or two caps a year, and that's it. Now they've got a cap a week, that kind of thing. Totally different. So that jacket has more history in it than either of us know about. But like you say, Jack Sanford wore it in the '62 World Series. And that team was managed and coached by all former New York Giants. Alvin Dark was the manager.
Yes.
Whitey Lockman was a coach. The pitcher from the Seattle and the PCF, not Jim Hearn, but another guy was a coach with that team. Whitey Lockman was a coach with that team. Anyway, I'm appreciative of that jacket. It means
it is in a great place.
It's surrounded by his history and history's memories, and it gets to hear the podcasts live.
Well, back to radio, when you had that AM dial in New York, there were things down the dial that were more adult, shall we say. And it wasn't like, when you were in the car, you wanted your parents to put on WABC or maybe WMCA 570, which is a little bit of a weaker signal. But they had great DJs. They had Dan Daniel, they had Joe O'Brien, they had B. Mitchell Reed, who was really kind of like a wild man going into the early 60s. They were out of that, so it seemed pretty quickly, I think, when WABC really became kind of the superpower. But when you get to the later down the dial, there was 710 WOR, which is still a news and information station. But it was rambling with gambling. It was two generations of gambling. There was John Gambling the father, John Gambling the son in the morning, and then as time went on, it was John Gambling the third. I think I forget exactly how he distinguished himself, in his name from the other two, but it was much more of an adult informational thing. But they lightened it up coming down as they started to. I don't know what finally happened, but Bob and Ray, the comedians, would be on as frequent guests. A couple of times I think they hosted shows, and they would do the routines, which to this day drive me to tears. They're so funny. And they would do the traffic, and Bob Elliott in that really low monotone voice. I mean, it was really, really, really funny. Then there was the old WHN, which I think was 1050. And that was kind of like maybe like an older kind of Sinatra-type music thing. The morning DJ there was a fella named Jim Amici. Nobody remembers Jim Amici. Who was Jim Amici?
Was he the football player, Jim Amici?
No, that was Alan Amici.
Alan Amici.
Jim Amici was Don Amici's brother. It might have been his twin brother. I mean, Zig, same voice, same inflection, same mannerism, and he was a long-time morning DJ for WHN in New York.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Whoa.
Jim Amici.
I didn't know that. I didn't know of him. Tony, you're an educator.
In the words of Ralph Cramden, the glorious results of a misspent youth.
Oh, was that a show or what?
I still crack up. I can't. I mean, we'll never see that again.
We'll never see that again. And what we won't see is his unabashed innocence at his ineptitude and his screwing up. He just, the way he looks at Alice when he's done something so stupid that I can't, there's nothing to replace that show. The closest that did it for me on television has been Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm.
He's about as close as you're going to come.
Right.
Yeah.
Larry David is absolute. That whole scene is so absolutely real that it almost scares me sometimes, because we look at all of our own things within inside of us that we're almost afraid to admit exists, and he just exhibits them as we'd like to be. Let's on some level, society doesn't allow it. Some funny stuff, but I think, like again, everything evolves. Without show of shows, the stuff we grew up listening to, we never would have had Larry David. We never would have had Seinfeld first. So there were pioneers in radio that you have to keep giving them credit for whatever it is radio has become.
Oh, for certain. Yeah. I mean, me personally, I'm a huge Jackie Vernon fan. How he was able to do those deadpan routines and Guido the Guide and hello thrill seekers and just how and
Jackie Vernon did the thing with the clicker.
Yes, he did.
He never ceased to amuse me. I'll tell you something. Jackie Vernon had a line. He was on Merv Griffin, and he's sitting there with Charo, and Merv Griffin is interviewing him. He's sitting on the couch, and Merv says to Charo, Charo is like in her 20s or 30s. Xavier Cugat was her husband, lover, yeah. Whatever. And he was considerably older, considerably younger than I am now, but considerably older. And Merv says, "Do you ever worry sometimes when you're making love, that something could go wrong. And Jackie Vernon says, "Well, if she dies, she dies."
I still laugh at the How to Meet Girls routine, and it's I walk on the beach and I go up to a beautiful girl and I start kicking around the sand and I say, "Excuse me, ma'am, have you seen my Congressional Medal of Honor lying somewhere neath your blanket?" And when she stays at me, she says, "That's okay. If I lost it, I have another one at home." It's just how, when you feel inferior and you want to feel superior, that's how your mind would work. And he just captured that perfectly. He really did.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'll tell you that what I flashed on for was a Woody Allen story. And Woody Allen tells the story of early on in his stand-up. He tells the story of his grandmother giving him a bullet. And she told him, "Always carry this bullet in your pocket, in your breast pocket, for good luck." And he says he's walking down the street, and a mad minister threw a Bible out of a 6-story window, and it would have gone right through me if it weren't for that bullet to protect me. So that was Woody Allen.
Yeah, he and Howard Cosell had a friendship. Howard appeared in a number of his movies, either in cameo or in character. And I mean, as far as I still think a sleeper, where when he's walking with Diane Keaton and Howard is playing, he's doing a sportscast on the TV, and she says to him, "What is that?" He says, "Well, that's something they would show people way back when who committed crimes against the state." And they would give and take, back and forth. Howard actually had a. I was watching some old. When my brain went entirely on off last night, I was watching some old ABC commercials on YouTube. He had a variety show in the mid-1970s that Robert Lipsyte, our mutual guest and friend, was the producer, I believe. It bombed. It just that they couldn't take Howard as a quote-unquote non-sports personality, when really he was really an incredibly well-rounded guy that knew a lot about a lot of different things.
Yeah, fascinating guy. An attorney during the war, worked in the Army as
he ran the ports in Brooklyn.
Howard did?
Yes, he did.
Really?
Yes, he did.
Whoa. Unabashed confidence. The man had absolutely, he could stand up there. And I love he and Ali, how they would interact. I love them. I love old tapes of them. Again, YouTube is where to find it. And I love the way he when Billy Crystal would imitate him and what have you, he'd love it. He was quite a guy. He also, I hate to say, he go down the tubes around alcohol. I don't think it was good for Howard.
No, it wasn't. When he lost his work routine, which I think was maybe like the mid-1980s, I think when WABC Radio had... he would do his 60-second spot, which I would listen to every night, like between it was like between 6:58 and 7 p.m. And he would walk into the studio, and he and Dan Ingram would just go back and forth. It was hysterical. and it was there's a few tapes of that surviving, but you talk about off-color, sharp-edged humor where they're just both cracking up. It was hysterical. But when Howard started to get out of the loop of things, which I'd say was maybe the mid-1980s, he really was kind of like a lost soul. And I think I've said the story before. One time, and this is back when I was, this is going back over 30 years ago, the late 1980s, when I was dating my first wife, Jean, I had walked her over. We were working in New York City. I had walked her over to the IBM building, which is 57th Street, and I started to walk back to where we worked at 50th Street and Park Avenue, and coming down the street was Roone Arledge and Joe Assetti, and Chet Ford, and Howard Cosell, who was this very, very, very tall, imposing man with a very small, almost like a pea head. And I thought, well, what do I do? I'll never have this chance again. So I stepped to the right, and I meekly waved, and I said, good afternoon, Mr. Cosell. He actually broke ranks with those other two gentlemen, turned, nodded to me, and said, thank you, young man, and how are you today? And he wanted somebody to recognize him. And I'll tell you, that made my day, my year. I mean, it still makes days for me when I think about it.
As eclectic a human being, I still remember him in an interview saying that this is before he did anything but sports. He said, I want to be significant. I want to cover the Senate. I want to be a political reporter. They've asked me this, and I've come to the top of my game with Monday Night Football, but I want to branch out.
Yes, he was before the Senate testifying on a number of issues. He was trying very hard. He was not successful in getting a national license for boxers because during that time, the biggest was when Ali started to show signs of it. But states being as they are, who do everything they can to have any kind of uniformity, not getting in the way of their little game, they wouldn't go along with it.
Yeah. That was something, you mentioned boxing and Ali and what have you, changing Ali's name, recognizing that he didn't want to be called Cassius Clay.
No, he did not.
So why make a big thing of it? Believe me, I can't think of anybody who accepted Ali before Howard Cosell.
Oh, without a doubt. And
had
it's
to
funny,
be the first
if you go
one.
back. No, please go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Had to be the first one.
If you go back to his comeback fight in 1970 in Georgia, the production company doing that was actually Tom Harmon with Bill Cosby doing the color. And Tom Harmon was a very good broadcaster. I mean, he certainly wasn't a jock with a mic. And he kept wanting to say Ali, but he kept saying Clay. And Bill Cosby didn't correct him at all. I mean, maybe Bill Cosby was thinking the same thing. I don't know. But many, many, many people thought of him as Clay, even still.
Right. And they just were so natural together in these pre-fight promotions and what have you. And Clay would come at him a little. They kind of spar, open-handed spars. Howard could stand up for himself. He could defend himself a little bit when they'd play. And like you say, he was a big guy, and Clay was a big guy when they were doing it. Then he became Ali.
Well, and on long plane flights, when they were flying together, like if there was a boxing match either in a foreign country or one where they had gone to, like where Ali was doing the color, with Howard to say to watch George Foreman fight or something.
Right.
When the flight got bored, Howard and Ali would do a comedy routine, and Howard would pretend to call him, I'll be politically correct or use the N-word, and Ali would say, "Did you say trigger?" It would be things like that, and Howard would call him boys. Like, did you say Roy? It was things like that, but they would just do it because they just enjoyed their routine together, and they love sharing it.
Yeah, interesting that with we minorities, humor is so important in covering up the real sadness, because this is the same person who threw his gold medal off the bridge over racial stuff that he and Howard were joking about.
Mm-hmm.
So breaking that tension is so important. With as a Jew, I know it. As an Italian, you know it.
Oh, sure.
Hey, Tony, what a good show, as usual.
Well, I'm glad you liked it, and I'm happy to contribute, and I am honored. I mean, we started to talk about Imus, but of course, when you talk about Imus, you start to think of everyone else who made your life a little bit better as you went through the airwaves in those days.
It's nice reliving the memories.
It certainly is.
All right. Stay healthy, my friend, and have a wonderful, happy New Year.
Thank you, my friend, and same to you, and the same to all our terrific listeners here.
Absolutely. We'll be back at you soon. Stay well, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I am Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Tony D'Angelo is my guest. You're special, my friend.
Thank you.
Adios, guys. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.